On the first episode of the HELLRASER SPRING SLAUGHTER, we were greeted to a harrowing story about 4 individuals who were not only captured by the Cenobites, but actually managed to escape. The first being an old man going by the name of wakowski, a man whose lifetime has been spent in the deep bowels of the land of the Gash, that he has lived to be almost 160 years old. And also, a man who has escaped over 3 different times and using his collective knowledge of the world down below, has actually created a book called The Structure and Order of Evil, something that would actually unite the other main characters of the story into actually meeting up in the same place and giving us this fantastic story of vengeance, as one by one they will hunt down the configurations, destroying them, and stabbing little symbolic knives in the guts of Leviathan. Now, how this man actually escaped is a man named Lee, an atheist and scientist, came across one of these configurations and learned that these things can actually be destroyed. And upon this, wakowski was freed once again. And accompanying Lee, a man named Garcia, a fallen priest, and somebody who has forsaken his religion, all in the name of fighting hell itself. A man who would do anything for just the image of victory. And the third and final main character, a nun named Helen, who after receiving one of these configurations from a priest in her parish, a man who she has suddenly fallen in love with, and a man who ended up being a guardian of one of these puzzles. And while that first chapter was absolutely fantastic, a great story leading to the recipe that would allow these people to actually figure out how to brandish these weapons that would destroy the pets of the Cenobites, we will finally be getting started on the rest of the book. And if you hadn't had a chance to go watch that other video, please go do so now, otherwise this is just going to be a little bit confusing. But where this will take us is through a bunch of different countries, rounding up all the configurations, as well as a little bit of a love story between Garcia and Helen. And where this will all begin is in the great walled city of Toledo, Italy, as they chase down this old gypsy woman who they know for a fact has one of these configurations that they've been trying to hunt down for so long. They'd been hunting the gypsy woman for weeks. Desperate, the prey had bolted. Usually, that meant the end. Their weapons fire arrows and bullets carved from Leviathan, bits and broken shards of the dark god's essence. And as they have this old gypsy woman cornered, she merely says that she is just an old lady. And upon Lee hearing this, he does not believe her whatsoever, and he calls out bullshit, sending out a scatter shot through her body and throwing her to the floor, a bloody and eviscerated mess. Hurry, Helen, I want to get out of here. Something is wrong, Lee. It's not here. Damn it, Lee, are you sure she was the one? Yes, it's here somewhere. It's gotta be. And as Lee begins his journey to actually search this old woman for himself, he finally finds the configuration that they've been hunting down. A wooden necklace wrapped around this woman's neck, something that I personally would have never guessed was a configuration, but as we've seen in so many of these other stories, many different objects can actually be these different puzzles. From poetry, to boxes, to music and paper. And as he begins to pull this off of her, we just see one eye bolt open. And suddenly Lee screams as this creature emerges from her body, something looking like a half-rotted dragon, and before flying up into the air, it grabs Lee by the shirt and it throws him against the ground. And as everybody realizes that this is in fact one of the guardians that they know has been harboring this configuration for God knows how long, Garcia lunges forward and begins to shoot a barrage of arrows, grabbing it by the foot and yelling, "You know who we are." And as he does so, this half-rotted dragon begins to fly up into the air, and Garcia holds on, not fearing anything, and telling it that if you do know who we are, you know that we never quit, putting his shotgun through this monster's ribcage and sending another scatter shot through its ribcage and out the top of his head, leaving a geyser of blood to spill out across the city. And as they both plummet to the floor, we see the half-rotted dragon dissolving against the concrete, and Lee holds up the necklace configuration up to the air and shouting at Leviathan that they have found yet another piece. And as he does so triumphantly, Helen runs to Garcia. "Garcia, let me help you." "No, I'm fine. Just give me a moment. Just the wind knocked out." And suddenly Garcia falls to the floor and Helen goes in to help once again. And this is the beginning of our new crucial story, the thing that will bring their mission to the end. And God, was I so excited to see how this all left off, as I needed to know if these people were actually going to be able to defeat Leviathan. And while this book does stay very refreshing, we all know how these things always end. It always ends in blood, with souls being sucked down into hell and to be tortured for an absolute lifetime. These things never go well. But with the next couple of pages, we will get to learn about Garcia's past as well as Helen, and on top of that, the final conclusion to all their efforts. There is no hope in hell, and there is no love, only pain. Those who manage to escape, to find their way out of that empty pit, often discover that the meat hooks and the razors and the darkness of Leviathan's world has destroyed more than just their flesh. They say scars show us the map of our lives, markers of where we've been. Not many people would want to follow this map. I would. But why, Helen? Don't you think it's strange that we never talk about it? About our lives before? About what happened? And as we're looking at this giant wound in Garcia's stomach, left by the half half-rotted dragon as Helen sews him up, Garcia begins to tell us a story. And before we get into this, I gotta say, I'm almost absolutely positive that this is actually connected to the Hellraiser book too, and this made me incredibly excited. As featured in that book, we see a dictator slowly taking in his citizens and throwing him into the cell, forcing them to kind of unlock this puzzle box that he's found, wanting to know what treasures possibly lie within, or at least something that can bolster his military strategy, and I just found that so cool. I killed my first man when I was 14, a general. He came to town where I lived, and he did not leave. He was leading his army against his own people, and I had lost 6 brothers to that war. I was full of hate, and I had a gun. I spent 6 years on the run, hiding, killing, but eventually I was caught, and I believe the prison I was held in was the puzzle's guardian, and it simply passed from one damn soul to the next. And what about your priest collar, Garcia? When I first escaped, I was afraid. I needed something to tell me that things were not like that first night. The Cenobite, he peeled off the flesh of my legs with his fingers, tore it off in chunks like an orange rind. And when he left, I kept thinking, oh God, I'm gonna bleed to death. All night, I spent trying to bandage my legs. And as Garcia's kind of recounting the story of how he actually spent a night in hell, and I must say, not explaining how he actually came to escape this place, he grabs Helen by the arms and he starts to scream, don't you see how ridiculous this is? How ludicrous it was. Helen begins to tell him that it's not like that anymore, and that he is no longer alone. And from here, we will start to see kind of a love story bloom between these two people. These people who are literally tied together by the torments that they have shared down in hell. And while the previous pages said that love could never be found in a place like the Gash, this just isn't the case. And with the next couple of pages, we will begin to see Lee growing a little bit resentful of these two's love, as he sits in his basement, trying to concoct the next plan to actually figure out how to destroy the next set of configurations, as apparently each one has their own set of rules. Their plan is a simple one: to hunt the Guardians, to steal the puzzles, the keys to hell, and to destroy them. Lee destroyed one by accident with a laser, and he knows it can be done again. He works all day and often into the night, and he knows that he is close. Before the Toledo trip, Helen and Garcia would be waiting for him when he came up from the cellar. They would ask about his progress, and together they would talk about the plan, about the other puzzles, or the new weapons that they would create. But now, things were different. And as we're seeing Lee clutching this paper into his hand, damning them both for the love that they share, and for letting him be alone down in this basement by himself, we see Garcia and Helen going on this walk, and entering this old abandoned chapel, where we will finally learn about Helen's origin story. And once again, not knowing how she escaped. That's about the only gripe that I have with this book, is it doesn't explain how these two actually escaped hell. It explains it for Isidore, and later on it explains for Lee, but for these two, we are just left completely in the dust. But we will just go ahead and ignore that for now. And as we hear a loud banging going off through this chapel, we see Garcia and Helen walk through. How terrible. Must have been a fire. It's funny. A phony priest and a fallen nun. I suppose we belong here. What do you mean, fallen nun? Okay, here it goes. When I was still at the convent, I fell in love. A new priest at our parish. I guess I'm a sucker for a man in black and white collar. Anyway, he ended up disappearing, but left me with a puzzle. And I really thought if I could solve it, he would just come back. At first, I thought I deserved all the pain, the punishment, but now, the God I love can never send anybody there, and I won't go back. I won't. But Garcia, I don't think I could do it myself. I'm here now, Helen. It's all right, and I understand. And as a few more days go by, we see everybody maintaining in the house, as it's a very rainy day, when suddenly Lee finds something out on the curb. Another person who has also made the trip down to hell and was able to return. Have you seen Lee? He must be still working in the cellar. I hope he's okay. We hardly ever see him anymore. And while Helen and Garcia are sitting at this table, just kind of wondering where Lee is, as he's been very silent lately, and his sightings have been very sporadic, we see the front door burst open, and Lee is clutching this woman in his arms. And Garcia gets up, asking him exactly who this is. And when Lee says that he doesn't know, and he found this in his pocket, everybody gets quite upset, as he pulls out this piece of paper, and this is a part of the story where I myself was a little bit confused. It is completely blank, and the only explanation I'd have to be for why Garcia gets so mad at him pulling this thing out is that it must be another configuration, possibly the origami puzzle that I've heard about so much through all you people in the comments, and if anybody can point that story out to me, that would be absolutely fantastic. But as he pulls out this loose and empty piece of paper, Garcia snaps. You did this without talking to us. Well, maybe if you two weren't so busy. Garcia, Lee, enough. It is done, and this woman is very sick. Help me get her into bed. And as a few hours pass, we are cutting to these panels. We see this mysterious woman's eyes begin to slowly awaken, and as she does so, she screams out loud, wondering exactly where she is, not used to this ordinary environment. And sitting next to her is Lee, holding up a newly fixed pair of glasses and telling her that everything is going to be okay. and that she is perfectly safe now. Here, these might help. Thank you. How long have I been? 3 days. It happened to all of us. I call it hell lag. You'll start to feel much better now. Trust me, after a while, even the dreams will go away. And as Lee and this newly found woman are made acquaintance, something sparks in both of their eyes. And we're cutting to the next panel where we see Helen and Garcia walking up to the room, very concerned about what is going on here, as they have no idea who this woman is and why she would possibly just appear outside of their house, let alone with this small piece of paper, something that must be a configuration itself. They go on their way to make sure that everything is alright. Concern was the word I used, not worried. Hush, Garcia. He might hear you. Here they are, Rachel. I'd like you to meet Helen and Garcia. She's the sister and he's the father. And by most accounts, I'm the mother. Yeah, we're one big happy family here. And as a few more days go by, Lee and this woman, Rachel, begin to get closer and closer. And this begins to worry Garcia and Helen even more, as they still don't really have any idea about who this woman is. And they begin to notice that the puzzle that they found in Toledo, the one being guarded by the half-rotted dragon, is suddenly gone. I can't believe he's taking her to the cellar already. Garcia, she's human. The test proved it. Yesterday I opened the cabinet, and the small puzzle, the one from Toledo, was gone. Lee probably has it. He liked it for some reason. And the first time upon reading this, hearing Helen kind of going on about how Lee just for some reason liked this thing, I immediately knew that this was going to be a red flag, as it would almost seem that an obsession is cast over him. And from here on out, I think there's just going to be mainly a lot of foreshadowing. But as we cut away from Helen and Garcia, we are cutting down into Lee's basement, his workshop, where he is trying to figure out how they destroy these configurations and getting Rachel up to speed about wakowski and about how they all escaped from the hospital, and about how they actually learned to make these weapons, using the defiled body parts of all the Cenobite's pets as well as themselves to brandish new weapons. But before Isidore died, he showed us that the puzzles are actually pieces of Leviathan, and that's why we want to destroy them. Can you kill Leviathan? I don't know, but he'll feel it. Little parts of him dying just like he did to us. And as Rachel and Lee are walking over to the cabinet that would harbor all these different configurations that they have come across, he opens the door, and Rachel is left completely shocked that this man would be holding all these items so close to his heart. As very obviously Rachel knows exactly where these things will lead, exactly what they could do to their bodies, and exactly how easy it is to fall in the clutches of the Cenobites once again. And as she stands there mouth agape, she basically just asks Lee if he's not afraid of what the Cenobites will do to him if he is caught yet another time. After destroying these configurations and after killing the guardians that harbor them, it just seems like an all-around bad idea. And from this point on, who couldn't tell that something could possibly go extremely wrong? Do? What more could they do? I remember after God knows how long, I woke up again, and I just started giggling, laughing like I was high or something. I called the Cenobite a wimp, told him to take his best shot, and no matter what he did, I just kept saying, "You can't kill me." And you weren't afraid? I was. It's easy to be afraid when you're alone, Rachel. I'm glad you were. You're glad I was afraid? No, alone. And as Lee and Rachel hold each other in their embrace, they begin to kiss. And this was just a segment of the book that I absolutely knew that Rachel was bad news. She's throwing up red flags everywhere, and while it does seem sweet that she would say this, when you really look at it, she's basically saying that she was happy that Lee was alone down in hell, being tortured for all eternity, being stripped of his flesh, and God knows what other cruel means. And as they continue their embrace, Lee looks to her, and he says, "God, I've been waiting for you so long." And we just get this panning shot of Rachel looking us dead in the eye, looking through the panel, as I'm doing right now. And she says, "I know, Lee. I know." And right there, absolute red flag. At this point, you would think a man, a scientist, an atheist of all intelligent levels, would actually have the common sense to realize who this lady could be, or possibly who she isn't, as I'm not trying to spoil this. But I think at this point, it's very obvious. And as the day fades into night, we are cutting to the next panel, and we see Lee and Rachel sitting there in bed, when suddenly Rachel is gone, and as he gets up and begins to walk throughout the house, he's looking through the kitchen, he's yelling her name, and suddenly he looks out the back window, and all we see is a light coming out of the cellar doors, and he immediately knows what is happening. And as Lee is walking down to the cellar towards this bright light coming out of it, he slams it open, and suddenly we are greeted to almost every single Cenobite that we've ever seen, all at once, all in the same location, as he realizes that it is over, that their plans to destroy Leviathan have been completely destroyed, and that this woman that he loves so much is the one that has foiled all this, whether it was maliciously or just on accident, being called by the desire of all these different puzzle boxes. It doesn't matter, and all hope is lost, as he screams out. And with this, we are seeing this giant panel, probably my favorite out of the entire book, as we actually see some familiar Cenobites that we've seen throughout the different books, as well as a ton that we've never seen before. These creatures with long necks, as we can actually see their spines sticking out of their bodies, like giant skeletal giraffes, as well as creatures covered in different faces, and a naked woman with forks for arms, which was very surprising. That seems like kind of the weirdest Cenobite design I've ever seen, but for the ones that we've seen before, we are seeing the one from the hospital story that we did a couple months ago. The one about the man who actually coerced a nurse into opening one of these puzzle boxes for him as his fingers could no longer feel anything, and selling her out to the Cenobite. And on top of that, we're seeing the very first Cenobite from the beginning of the HELLRASER SPRING SLAUGHTER, the one who was holding Isidore Kowalski in its own captivity. And last but not least, we are actually seeing Pinhead, as we see chains surrounding everything, and we just see his tiny head sticking out of the background. And as awesome as this panel is, it just left me with such a feeling of disappointment, as I really thought that these people might actually be able to at least stop a good chunk of Leviathan's pets, to actually put an end to the Land of the Gash, a name that I really still haven't gotten over, and something that really does sound so incredibly heinous. But as Lee is screaming and screaming and screaming down in the basement, we cut over to Helen Garcia as they lay in their bed and suddenly awake, hearing Lee's screams off in the distance, and as they get up, they look out the window, seeing every single one of these Cenobites rushing out of the cellar doors, and from here on out, they know what they must do. Come on, the woods! They tear, animal wild, through the woods, the slashing whip of branches driving him harder and faster. Behind them, they hear the shrieks, the mad howls, and the pounding feet of the hounds of hell. Desperate, the prey had bolted, and usually that meant the end. The church, Helen. It'll be over soon. And as we are coming to the tragic end of Helen and Garcia, as they're rushing through the woods to the burnt chapel that we seen earlier, they both take a knee, and they hold each other in their own embrace, and they decide that they are going to go out on their own terms. Something so completely understanding as being captured by one Cenobite is enough, but 20 more trying to catch the prey that they've already lost, and having such a desire to capture these people and destroy them over and over again, to punish them for their great crime, for escaping their clutches. And as they both look into each other's eyes, we will hear their last words. God, I know you will forgive this man, what he is about to do. He does out of love. You better wait for me. I will. I love you, Garcia. I love you, Helen. And they kiss one final time, and he holds her tight against him as the knife slides into her heart. Then, he lays her back gently, brushing the hair softly before turning the knife towards himself. And in the perfect stillness of the church, they lay still and calm, their blood draining and pooling together. And then, they wake up. And suddenly we are cutting to the next panel, and we see Helen and Garcia waking up in this dark, nightmarish room. And as they stand up and look around, they see Rachel once again. And suddenly 4 doors open, accompanied by the Cenobites behind them. And how any of this happened, how they actually came to be taken back down to hell, is I kind of figured that maybe Rachel turned this entire church into a configuration itself. And the actual key to solving this thing was for them to spill their own blood in it. Now, I'm not sure if these Cenobites are actually able to decide the puzzles, to actually decide the rules of how these things will be open, but I will say that this does actually make sense, as in the VR Hellraiser video that we did a while ago, and if you haven't seen that, go watch it, it's very interesting. We actually seen a scientist create a puzzle that all it took was for one man to figure out how to create the ultimate form of pain, using a computer and virtual reality to inflict pain without causing death, something I find so incredibly terrifying, but this is really the only conclusion that I could come up with. But as Helen and Garcia are pulled to the ground, we see Rachel standing next to another Cenobite that we've never seen before. Ah, love. Parting is such sweet, delicious sorrow. Helen, no! Garcia, don't leave me! Please, just hold me! And with this, Helen and Garcia are pulled apart, taken to their own torture chambers, something I find so incredibly unfair. But as Rachel is standing next to the Cenobite that she's made her deal with, she will end up getting her own comeuppance. As she begins to leave this dark room, and the Cenobite steps in front of her. Hey, what's this? Get out of my way! We had a deal! Our deal included all 4 of them. But Isidore Kowalski is dead. I know. Pity. But a deal is a deal. And with this, we are seeing Rachel being dropped through the floor, as we see flames and hands arise from it, pulling her down into her own little section of hell. And this is the ending of chapter 2, something that I was so incredibly sad about, as these people started with everything. They had the rules. They had the ability to actually crush these different boxes, to destroy the pets of the Cenobites, and it all went down in hell in a handbasket so incredibly fast. But of course, this is a Hellraiser comic book, and I guess there's really not much much to be expected here. But as we cut to the next couple of pages, we are going to cut over to Lee, as he lays in his own little slice of hell, being tortured by yet another Cenobite, as he begins to make his second and final escape. And as we're looking at this table, with Lee's crushed glasses standing on them, accompanied by a pool of blood, as well as many, many teeth. Hurts like a bitch, don't it? You can spit now. Let's try something else, shall we? Don't have much time. You wouldn't believe the list waiting for their turn with you. You're a regular celebrity around here. And as Lee's tormentor keeps going on, in letting him know about his vile future to come, we see Lee grab a pair of scissors off the table. Hey, stop it! I don't want to open your stomach yet. You can't kill me. And Lee suddenly holds something above his head, and the only thing that I can really think this is you only see a slight line around his neck, and I'm assuming that this is the wooden necklace that they found from the gypsy woman in Toledo, Italy. And with this, the Cenobite stands behind him screaming, as suddenly we see a red puff of smoke go up, and Lee has made yet another escape. And from here, we will see Lee's attempt to actually save Helen and Garcia, as he knows that he is the reason why they have made yet another trip down to hell, and something he feels an immense amount of guilt about. And with this guilt, we're cutting to the next panel, where we see a dog sitting down on the floor, as Lee begins to make plans to make the weapons that would inevitably destroy Helen and Garcia's captors. In Of Hell, wakowski wrote, human love can still be found in the most inhuman domain. It can be found among the chains and hooks in the hanging racks of razors and double-edged knives, another implement used to destroy, to bleed and butcher the soul. Since his second escape, Lee has read Of Hell again and again, committing much to it to memory. He has developed a kinship with Isidore. When he thinks back to the dark cellar, and he hears the grate of the saw against the old man's shinbone, Lee understands. Lee tries not to think about Helen and Garcia and about the ways in which they are being destroyed, but in truth, he can think of little else, and he is haunted by their pain. He wonders if he finds them, and he frees them, if it will even be enough, if they will be able to forgive him. Each bullet shell is covered with a paste made from the ground black knuckle bone. Every night he has worked it until his hands are raw and cramped, still no closer to solving it, and in the pit of his stomach he knows he can never solve it. Only desire can solve the puzzles, not guilt, and that is why he needs Lewis tomorrow night. He will bring Lewis here, and through the haze of whiskey that numbs his mind, he thinks about Rachel, and Lewis, and Izzy, and Helen and Garcia and himself, and somehow they all fit together. And as Lee is vomiting in this toilet, he lifts his head, and we are seeing this terrifying face coming from the puke and the blood and the vomit that has been left in this porcelain basin, and he can only wonder of which one of his friends, or lover, that this face could possibly be. And with the next couple of pages, Lee will make his way to this alternative nightclub, a gay bar meant for people who enjoy the acts of S&M, and a place where he has met the perfect candidate, somebody who is so filled with desire, and somebody that will never really help him solve one of these puzzles again. And I gotta say, his entire plan for this whole situation, how he will go back to hell, as well as planning out his own escape, is one that I actually find very interesting. And while it is a little weird and strange as he begins to tie this man up with all these different ropes, completing the most complex set of binding knots I've ever seen, and from all this, we will meet the man who will come to solve this puzzle for Lee. Hello, Lewis. I just spoke with Victor. I asked him if I could take you home, if it would be alright if we played a game. What kind of game, Lee? Put this on, and you will find out. There, that should hold you. I don't think I like this, Lee. This is how we play. In your hands, I'm going to place a puzzle box, and I want you to solve it. As soon as you solve it, I want you to turn it back as fast as possible. I will then leave the room for 1 hour, and at the end of the hour, an alarm clock will go off, and you will again solve the puzzle, and again, turn it back as fast as you possibly can. I know this sounds strange, but it's my game, and if you do not obey, I will hurt you. Do you understand? Now, take hold of this, and whatever happens, don't let go. But Lee, I'm terrible at puzzles. What if I can't solve it? You can solve this one. How do you know? I can't see it or anything. You do not solve this puzzle with your mind. Feel it. Run your fingers along its edges. It's getting warm, Lee. Listen to me, Lewis. How does it feel to be strapped in that chair? I could do whatever I wanted to you. How does that make you feel? And as Lee says this to Lewis, it is him basically teasing this man, actually filling his heart with more desire than he could possibly ever wish for. And this is the key factor to Lewis actually solving this puzzle in the deep darkness of this room. And in doing so, suddenly we see Lewis yelling, "Now, turn the puzzle back," and 2 gunshots fire off in the midst of this darkness. And finally, we are cutting to the next page where we will see Lee standing triumphantly, something that reminds me so much of Ash from the Evil Dead, almost as the perfect cover of the Army of Darkness. And with it, a dead Cenobite lies on the ground. Lee's plan has come to perfect fruition, and I gotta say, turning off all the lights to make sure that Lewis doesn't actually see this entity opportunity to actually freak him out and not ever want to solve these puzzles again is absolutely ingenious, as well as his plan to immediately fire on the Cenobite, exploding its head. And with the rest of this gracious plan, we will actually see Lee and his dog running through hell, trying to find different body parts of Helen and Garcia, and actually making a tie back to the original Hellraiser movie. I'm back, Leviathan. Did you miss me? Come on, boy. This old nun habits of Helen is old, but I know you can pick it up. For an instant, he begins to think of Rachel. Will they use her against him? Will he kill her? Or will he let her continue to suffer here? Lee hears the bones snapping dully like white sticks, and gelatin-filled organs squishing and bursting beneath his footsteps. And as Lee is making his way through hell, he looks to the ground, where he actually sees the entire scalp of Helen laying down on the floor, something that he knows that he can take back with him to Earth, and something that he can also use to recreate her body. The same exact way that we seen Julia recreate Frank's body. And the only thing that kind of gives me a little bit concerned with Lee trying to resurrect Helen and Garcia is that Julia in the movie needed to go out and kill like 3 to 5 different men, all in the sake of giving this man more blood to actually form him up through the floorboards of the old house. And I'm not sure if this was going to make anything right, if Lee killing people to bring back his friends is quite the right choice here. But as he picks up the scalp, he looks to his watch and realizes that there's only 36 minutes left, and he continues his journey, going not far off, and suddenly the dog finds yet another body part laying on the floor, Garcia's feet. And as Lee is approaching this, he looks up above these feet, and we are seeing the skin-legged body of Garcia once again, with his head completely taken off his own body. And seeing his friends set to such torture, Lee is thrown a gasp. Soon, you'll be in Helen's arms. I swear it. He races back with the remains of Helen and Garcia. The time was perfect. He was going to do it. If only he could make it back to Lewis. And with Lee trying to make his entrance back to Earth, we are cutting back over to Lewis, as we just basically see his nipple sitting there in the dark, with his piercing sticking through, and with one of these strings actually tied to it. And at this point, I knew something was going to go terribly wrong, as the string begins to draw tighter and tighter, and Lewis begins to realize that maybe Lee is possibly going back, and that maybe he is simply just trying to tease this man, but that is not the case, as we see his nipple completely ripped off his own body, something that made my entire body shudder just thinking about this pain, this weird torture of his nipples being ripped off. And with the de-nippling of this man, we see Lee come back to Earth, to a room absolutely covered in blood, and the only thing left up hanging in the room is Lewis's bloody leather mask, accompanied by the Cenobite that Lee initially destroyed on his last visit to hell, and one that is feeling particularly confident about this whole situation. But I killed me, Lee? Leviathan is God here. God! You atheists have such a problem with that. Now, as for you, drop. Your friends and you are free to go. See, we know you, Lee. With Lewis added to your conscience, you'll have to try again. And we all know you can't solve them anymore. We'll be seeing you soon, Lee. And as the Cenobite leaves, and we come to our last couple of pages, we are seeing Lee sitting down in this chair, as he holds a shotgun up to his chin, and basically all hope at this point has been lost. They don't think I have the strength to do it. They made a mistake. They don't realize it's destroyed me, my soul. They don't realize it's destroyed me. My soul's been bled and butchered. Lewis, Garcia, Helen, I'm so sorry, but I have nothing left. And as Lee says this, he inevitably pulls the trigger and ends his own life, as we see his brain spread across the entire room. And with seeing Lee end it all, I was so incredibly sad, as he managed to be one of my all-time favorite characters. As a very smart individual, somebody who actually has studied all the information that he needs to figure out how to destroy these configurations, and with such a surefire plan, I really didn't think that it was all going to come down to this, to strip us of any hope of Leviathan actually falling asunder, as well as all the Cenobites down below. And it's just not really quite how I wanted this book to end. But with this, at least the HELLRASER SPRING SLAUGHTER leaves us with just a little shred of hope, as we see Lee laying down on the ground, with his clothes completely stained by the blood of his friends. And this is another callback to the original movie, as suddenly from these bloodstains, we are hearing the voices of Helen and Garcia emerging. Garcia! Helen, is that you? It's so dark! This way, I can see the light. I feel it. I feel heat. And suddenly a hand emerges from the chest of Lee. Something that I can only assume is actually Helen and Garcia arising from his body. And with this, I thought this completely made sense, as we've seen in the first Hellraiser movie, just a singular drop of blood left on the floorboards of where Frank had originally solved the puzzle wasn't enough for him to make an entire new recreation. And this leading to Julia having to slay all these different men, bringing their bodies and dumping them into the room where Frank could actually feed on them and actually use their bodies to construct his own. This time, the little fragment of blood left by Garcia and Helen sitting on Lee's shirt is enough, and seeing them emerge gives this book all the ending that I could possibly need. And with this is the end of our story. Something that I found so incredibly sad, and I think all of you will agree, is with the first chapter, everything was going so well. Besides the one man that was taken by the pet of the Cenobites and the tragic death of wakowski, but we actually got to see these people create the recipe that would allow them to destroy all these enemies. And I really thought that throughout this book, we would actually get to see them destroying more of these Cenobites. And once again, sticking the symbolic knife through the guts of Leviathan himself, and actually taking down at least a couple more of these beings. But with this, we only got to see the gypsy woman from Toledo, Italy be destroyed and her configuration taken, and we didn't even really get to see more of these configurations destroyed. And really, I guess I just don't really know what I was thinking, as like I've said before, this is a Hellraiser story, and surely it could not end in anything other than the sweet suffering of the characters that live inside of these books. But overall, I do think the Hellraiser Spring Slaughter was one of the better ones throughout this entire franchise that I've read thus so far, at least from the comic books from the 90s, as it has something very refreshing, and instead of a bunch of different short stories, we finally got a nice concise story all the way through, something that was very interesting, and something with characters that I found really good, with Lee, Garcia, and Helen and Isidore being very capable people, as well as hearing the book that Isidore created, The Structure and Order of Evil, something that I am almost positive is featured in another one of Clive Barker's books, The Book of the Damned. So if any of you actually know about that, please let me know if these things are actually connected, and I don't know if the emerging hand out of Lee's body is actually continued in the Hellraiser Summer Special. So I think the next thing that I'll be getting to read for myself is that, and obviously we're probably gonna get to the point where I make videos on that as well, but maybe we'll save that for August or something of the sort. But yes, everybody, we finally made it through the Hellraiser Spring Slaughter. I know I said I was going to do this in 3 different parts, and I'm sure you guys won't mind, but I just kind of decided that it would be better to do this in one solid long chunk to finish the story, so we can actually move on to some other stuff, as well as getting a nice big long video. So if this thing is delayed, which I absolutely know it's going to be because I've recorded this video 3 separate times trying to absolutely nail the atmosphere, as sometimes when I record these videos, I know the first one isn't quite right, or I kind of stumble over my own mouth or whatever, and with these longer videos, my tongue begins to go numb from talking so much. But that is okay, and I'm happy to do so. But anyways, everybody, thank you so much for watching. The last video did so well, and actually seeing an influx of subscribers, and that made me incredibly excited, as well as the video getting more views than most of them do. That just made me so happy, and seeing all of your comments down below, and actually kind of talking to all you different people, means so incredibly much to me. And this whole channel has been just such a fun process, and I'm just so happy with the direction that it's going. I feel like I'm really hitting my format here, trying to take comic books and actually just trying to put them in a more entertaining aspect, so people who aren't as versed to actually reading these things can maybe enjoy them along with us. But yes, everybody, once again, I'm beginning to ramble and my mouth is going numb, so I'm going to have to end this video right here. And if you are new to this channel, please hit that subscribe button, please like the video, please go talk to some people down in the comments. It helps the channel so much with actually being able to reach out to new people across YouTube, and it's something that I would very much appreciate. But yes, everybody, have yourself an absolutely fantastic day. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you on the next episode of From the Heart. Arise, my humble audience.